When the UFC was formed in 1993, there was one simple purpose: determine which form of martial arts was the most effective in a real fight. Since then, there have been a plethora of fighters in the UFC, but some fighters have had fighting styles so unique that they will be remembered forever. In this video, we'll discuss in detail the most exciting and unique fighting styles in the history of UFC. Without further delay, let's get into it. How did these UFC fighting styles originate? Many of these unique and exciting fighting styles came from the early days of the UFC, when fighters only knew one style. But what happened when MMA fighters became more well-rounded and single, one-dimensional martial arts techniques became less common, right? So which style is the most unusual, unique, and exciting fighting styles? Let's find out. So here are 13 of the strangest or most unique, or whatever synonym you choose to call it, fighting styles to grace the Octagon. It's important to note that it's difficult to quantify uniqueness here, so these aren't ranked per se, but rather go from the least strange to the most. We'll be starting off with the face-smashing Fu. The style, face-smashing Fu, was coined by Benji Razor Radek. Radek was the only practitioner of this style, which was really just a clever name applied to Radek's favorite methodology: punching people in the face until they're unconscious or they quit. Next is Thug Jitsu. Thug Jitsu is yet another style that is a style in name only. However, its founder, Yves Edwards, has pulled off some exciting moves in MMA, so his Thug Jitsu is worth having on the list. The next UFC most exciting fighting style in our list is Muay Boran. Muay Boran is kind of like Muay Thai's grandfather. Muay Boran was Muay Thai before it became a recognized sport, so it uses some different moves, some of which are considered to be more impractical. Even though no fighter has listed Muay Boran as his style, Anthony Showtime Pettis has brought the martial art into the cage. After Pettis landed his famous round kick off the cage, called the Showtime kick, his trainer Duke Rufus told MMAJunkie.com that the move was inspired by old-school Muay Thai techniques where you climb up on people and land techniques. Though Pettis isn't a Muay Boran fighter, it was important to talk about the style because it helped inspire one of the most exciting moves seen in mixed martial arts. Next in our list of exciting fighting style in UFC is Krav Maga. Krav Maga has a reputation for being a rough martial art that works best on the street. Whether or not this is true is not the point of this video, so we won't talk about it here. Krav Maga is used by the Israeli military and focuses on quick, powerful blows to the most vulnerable parts of the body. Keep in mind that Krav Maga is not weird in and of itself, but that it and the other martial arts on this list are weird compared to the ones that are more common in the UFC. Moti Horenstein, the only person to practice the diverse Israeli martial art in the UFC, did not do well. He went 0-2 in the UFC and 1-6 in MMA as a whole. Following the Krav Maga, we have pit fighting. Originally attributed to David Tank Abbott at UFC 6, who later denied that he ever invented the art and stated that it was billed as his fighting style by the promoters, pit fighting was essentially just brawling given a different name. Another UFC fighter, Scott Ferrazzo, was also a pit fighting practitioner, and his career was equally fruitless. Next is trap fighting. Paul Verhoeven's was the only fighter to ever represent trap fighting in the UFC, and at 6 foot 8 inches, 300 pounds, he certainly deserved his nickname of the Polar Bear. What exactly was trap fighting? It involved trapping the opponent in close range in such a way that he or she could be struck without being able to defend themselves. Did Verhoeven's represent the martial art well? Only against people with little skill who were smaller than him. It's probably best to throw trap fighting in the ash heap of martial arts history, along with some others yet to come. What about hand-to-hand fighting style? Greg, the Ranger Stott, deserves to be respected because of the fact that he really was an Army Ranger and had the intestinal fortitude to step into the cage with Mark Kerr, aptly nicknamed the Smashing Machine in his prime. However, what he does not deserve respect for is his martial arts style, which was simply listed as hand-to-hand. The fight doesn't exist on the internet, at least not legally, so a brief description will be provided. A jacked Mark Kerr clinches with a somewhat pudgy Stott who was wearing khaki shorts. Kerr lands a devastating knee and the fight ends at 17 seconds in. The next unique, or rather strange fighting style in the UFC history is Pencak Silat. Pencak Silat, which can also be called just Pencak or Silat, is an umbrella term for Indonesia's unique martial arts. Silat is mostly a striking art, but it also puts a lot of emphasis on weapons and has some takedowns. At UFC 2, this art was shown by the Spaniard Alberto Cerro Leon, who fought the big judoka Remco Pardol. Cerro Leon did well for a striker who had only one skill. Even though he was on the bottom, he was able to stop a bigger fighter who was good at submissions from submitting him for almost 10 minutes while he was on the bottom. It was one of the lost fights at UFC 2 that couldn't be shown on the pay-per-view broadcast or put on the DVD because of time constraints. They were on the VHS, and they used to be on YouTube, but the UFC took them down. It could be for the best, who knows. Next is ninjitsu, or exotics. In UFC 2, there was a fighter named Scott Morris whose fighting style was just called exotics. In UFC 3, ninjitsu was listed as Steve Jenham's fighting style. He was the tournament winner. What do these two guys both have in common? Robert Bussey's Warrior International was the name of the program where they both trained. Robert Bussey's fighters only went 3-2 in the Octagon, and 3 of those wins against opponents who were not very good. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles may have put an end to the ninja trend when Steve Jenham and Scott Morris lost. Either way, it's probably best for mixed martial arts, MMA, that ninjitsu, or exotics, has been shown to be a weak martial art and has been taken out of the mainstream because of it. Then, there's Kuk Sul Won. Kuk Sul Won is a Korean martial art that was made in 1958 with the goal of combining all the Korean martial arts. It was basically a Korean version of mixed martial arts. In the early days of the UFC, arm wrestling champion Gary Goodridge represented this martial art. Goodridge had only taken 2 classes in the art. He just went to the dojo and told them he wanted to fight for them in the UFC. In the end, they let him, and they gave him the rank of 4th degree black belt. What about the Sansu? Jimmy Ha Woo, a martial artist, was the first person to teach the style of Kung Fu called Sansu Kung Fu. It was based on throws, pressure points, and strikes to weak points, among other things. At UFC 2, Thaddeus Luster, who was said to be a 7th degree black belt in the art, fought for it. His opponent was Freak Hammaker, a Dutch man who did Sambo and owned a pornography theater. Luster did manage to take Hammaker down with a hair pull trip, but Hammaker got up right away, and Luster eventually lost by giving up. Sansu fighting style never got another chance to be used in the Octagon. This fight is one of several lost fights that weren't shown on the UFC 2 pay-per-view or DVD. This is a good thing for martial arts because it's almost like they never happened, so it might be lost forever. Luster is so rare that there isn't even a picture of him. Instead, a blurry picture of his opponent will have to do. Next up, Kailua. Kailua, also called Kapu Kailua, is the martial art from the Hawaiian Islands that's used to break bones. This style has only been used once in the UFC, and it was by John Matua, a 400-pound Samoan. At UFC 6, Matua fought Tank Abbott, and Abbott gave Matua one of the worst knockouts in UFC history. When your martial art loses to pit fighting, it's probably time to learn a new one. Wrapping it up, we have Jo Sun Do. Jo Sun Do, also called the Way of Jo Sun, is a form of martial arts that was created by Kimo Leopoldo's trainer and convicted rapist, Jo Sun. What did Jo Sun really do? We might never find out, because Sun never won a fight in his MMA career. He went 0-4. At the end of the day, the most famous thing about Jo Sun Do is that Sun kept getting punched in the genitalia. People weren't lining up to ask, where can I learn that? So it's not surprising that Jo Sun Do disappeared from the world of martial arts. That concludes today's video. If you found the video helpful, please do consider giving us a thumbs up, and don't forget to share the video with your friends and family. See you next time.